Hey, welcome to an episode of Blogging Aheads, where we're going to discuss international politics and then seamlessly blend that into American politics. It's going to be amazing. I'm Dave Weigel, the Washington Post.
Ben Smith from POLITICO.
And it's good to see you virtually.
Yeah, it's very good to see you. Congratulations on your new gig in the mainstream media.
Thanks. I guess this is still month one, so it's still
You're sort of a foreign correspondent among conservatives over there.
Well, yes, and we just launched. I shouldn't agree with that.
You shouldn't.
There's actually good coverage of that. I mean, I have a colleague, Amy Gardner, who before I got here was always scooping me on things, and is still scooping me on interesting developments in the conservative movement. But today we launched Post Politics, where I am one of the people adding content every 3 or 4 seconds to this hub. So yeah, it's going pretty well. Thanks for.
Sounds like Politico.com, kind of.
A little bit like that, with less. I was going to say less winners and losers, but we'll probably get to acquiring more winners and losers. I mean, I enjoyed the headline the other day on immigration. It was the stories are always better than the headlines. The headlines are just candy to get you there. But it was something like no winners in immigration bill, and I read that and said, well, theoretically the immigrants would be winners, but I guess politically, not the parties.
Well, not in this bill.
Yeah.
Or losers.
Okay.
But yes, we probably shouldn't engage in sparring between our respective institutions. It's going to bore everybody except us. But anyway, what I meant to say was congratulations on the new gig, and at least you're not Gordon Brown.
I'm not. I think we're thinking about the same Gordon Brown instance from today, aren't we?
Yes,
I've
logged on it 3 times already.
Yeah.
So it's actually a friend in the UK kind of flagged it for me, and it's really driving British politics today.
Mm-hmm.
Gordon Brown, the kind of campaign theme of the moment is getting out and meeting with regular voters, sort of Hillary Clinton late in the day style, and showing that he can identify. And so he was out there identifying at great length with this grandmother, disabled widow from who had a lot of complaints.
Disabled, but not like in a wheelchair.
Not visibly disabled. No. Just an older woman.
Mm-hmm.
It later emerged that she was a disabled widow who had a lot of complaints about taxation, who felt he'd been a good chancellor but had slipped as prime minister, but she was a lifelong Labour voter. She later said she had in fact already filled out the ballot to vote for him and would now not mail it in. But so he's out there, he's feeling her pain and asking her about her grandkids, and actually for him, emoting like crazy. And doing a pretty good job of it, and then he gets back in the car and says, "Who let me talk to that bigot woman? Who was it? Was it Sue? How did she do that?" And he does not realize that he's still wearing the mic pinned to his collar from for Sky News.
Right, and you posted the amazing apology where he apologizes by insulting the network for making him wear the mic and the staffer for putting him in that position. And still
the best thing is that he didn't really apologize to the woman. He apologized for his staffer's idiocy and allowing him to have contact with a person who he would obviously have to insult.
Right.
At least that was the sort of clearest. I mean, it wasn't I think he tried to sort of clean that up as well, but it was really one of the great political disasters. And it's one of those things that confirms everything anybody's ever nasty said about Gordon Brown, and it fills sort of a gaffe-shaped hole that was occupying that particular election. Like everybody was waiting for some ridiculous thing to move the story on from, hey, look, this guy Nick Clegg seems to be winning, and this is it.
Yeah, this isn't a situation like Massachusetts where Martha Coakley had never really run a campaign. No one knew that she was a gaffe machine. I mean, Brown is good at producing a horrible gaffe every month, and usually in regards to insulting a constituent somehow. And this
or just not being a nice person. He was accused of, I think, really physically bullying some of his aides. That was sort of the last scandal, that he was throwing people around and scaring them.
He's never had a great human touch.
When Elliot Spitzer did it, there's a way to do it. Elliot Spitzer, it was passion. Mm-hmm. Whenever somebody would say, "But you threatened to kill this person," his people would say, "Well, he's very passionate about what he believes." But it doesn't seem to be working for Brown.
Well, also, I guess no one's really compared this to the Joe the Plumber moment with Obama, because Obama ended up destroying John McCain everywhere, including that county and that state. But the difference is, you've seen Obama in action a lot, and I've seen him in action a lot. If somebody disagrees with him, he manages to disagree while sounding like they've got the best point he's ever heard. And
being very respectful and almost sort of bringing them in. Yeah, that's right. And I think And Brown tries to do that for 5 or 6 long minutes. I mean, in fact, who knows what Obama said after he got into the car with, after fighting with Joe the Plumber. But
I don't know. Even off the record, you never hear the worst I've heard. I've heard of him kind of joking about politicians that he couldn't be quite as mean to.
Right.
When I've talked to body people and staffers after the fact, but nothing about like the voters he's met. I haven't heard that. Now maybe we have heard John McCain
really
being
hate meeting people. It's a tough business to be in.
Well, especially this immigration. The fact that this was a flashpoint immigration is interesting because
nice segue.
I could go on a tangent about British politics because one of the only stories about British politics that's covered in America is the rise of the National Party, which is basically a racist reform Nazi party in Britain that has succeeded by getting all these old labor voters who are angry about the economy and want to focus it on race. But the American connection is that we're just talking about Obama. If you were campaigning in Iowa in 2007. Every other question was about immigration.
Yeah,
and, the candidates who succeeded were the ones who could navigate that minefield. And now it's blown up again in a not quite a huge way. Like Republicans are still able to dodge it. I actually was talking to the governor of Puerto Rico today, and he was giving me the whole I haven't read the bill. All politics is local.
Alternately, this is a symptom. I'm not going to comment directly. This is sort of what Romney did. This is a symptom of Washington's failure. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to. Which is a way to avoid taking a position on this piece of legislation.
But
also
coming
it's
around.
True.
You saw the Republicans candidate for governor of Colorado, I think is tied in the polls, said he would introduce a similar bill, or he would sign a similar bill in Colorado.
Yep, in Nevada, all three Republican candidates said that they would support it, and the incumbent governor went a bit further and actively endorsed racial profiling, except of the Irish.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is actually, I see this as a reflection of the increasing state-driven politics of the right, and it shouldn't be surprising. But it wasn't something that happened in during Bush's presidency, that Democratic states were just going on their own, and maybe you saw it with things like stem cells and minimum wage, but not anything
well,
really
I think you saw actually. Speaking of Elliot Spitzer, you saw it with regulating Wall Street, suing power plants for emissions, things like that. I think that's a really good point that the party out of power is currently driving stuff at the state level, and there's this overlay of really a states' rights, 10th Amendment push that's, I think, also in play there. Yeah, although this one, it's not like the national Republican Party is driving it through the states. It's like this one is producing, I think, immense discomfort at the national level, and you see Karl Rove, Jeb Bush, the people who've been running the Republican Party for the last 10 years, really distancing themselves from it and really feeling like I think it's undermining these decades of work they did to try to bring Hispanics back.
Well, and it's an open question if the next Republican Party will agree with Rove, will agree with Russell Pierce, who introduced this bill in Arizona, because they really did feel like a bulwark in 2007, 2008 against the opinion of the Republican base. I mean, you linked to a poll. I think it's public policy polling. I haven't got around to linking it because the Post has its own big polls, and we like to wait for those results on some stuff. But public policy polling found Jan Brewer's. Rasmussen
huge
found
out of this. Yeah,
Rasmussen found Jan Brewer's numbers going way up, and again that Rasmussen people like.
But this is people. I mean, I think that there's always a vocal minority on this issue, but in border states, people care a lot more. Like it's not necessarily top of the agenda, even though people will grumble about it elsewhere. But clearly in Arizona, it's just on fire.
But, this happened in 2006. Maybe elections are just too complicated for us to make this analyses, but immigration was debated around this time, maybe a little bit later in 2006. And then Republicans lost a bunch of House seats in the Southwest. They lost the J.D. Hayworth seat, the open, why am I forgetting his name? Jim Colby seat in Arizona. Napolitano won re-election by a landslide. The difference was Democrats had a finessing argument they could make, which was, we all agree it's the federal government's problem for not enforcing the border.
Which sounds similar. I mean, I think the problem with the Republican Party embracing this as with the notion that the Republicans can embrace this, it's at least in kind of the right now as like this killer issue, is that so many Republicans see it even in the medium term as a really bad issue and are running away from it. I mean, there's an argument to be made it's a great 2010 issue and a terrible 2012 issue for them. I mean, I think, and there is, and I think the question of whether it's no-win, like that can't literally be true in the sort of zero-sum of politics. But the leaders of both parties in Washington really have been acting like it's no-win and running away from it.
But they really are being led by the states. I mean, I know some Republicans in Congress who are thinking about legislation, mostly because they're thinking that Democrats will introduce some federal legislation, obviously federal legislation, some legislation that would challenge what Arizona did, but they're really several steps behind what's happened there. I mean, they're because they're not sure if it's good for them. And
a lot of them really didn't take positions on it until after it was signed into law. Like, you didn't see Jeb Bush down there campaigning against it or writing Brewer a letter saying, "Don't sign this," which is if somebody had wanted to stake out kind of a aggressively pro-immigrant Republican position, they could have done. Instead, you saw them afterward trying to take these calibrated positions that this isn't a very good idea, but really it's Obama's fault. I mean, I think the politics of it are really hard to predict. Democrats are sometimes very, like the Harry Reid seem to be trying very straightforwardly to cash in on it politically.
So is that your interpretation of Harry Reid, that he sees a pool of Hispanic voters in Nevada he can motivate if he is seen as working on a bill?
I mean, I guess I didn't see this so much in the terms of Nevada, although I think that's probably right too. But I think there's clearly a sentiment in parts of the Democratic Party that this is going to be a tough year for us, but here's this unpredictable issue that's freaking the Republicans out. Let's kind of throw it into play, and we'd rather talk about this than about healthcare. Well,
I mean, they've got the frontline really endangered seats in this. Some of them are Nevada and Colorado,
But if there's some of them can vote against comprehensive. I mean, there's a lot of members of the House can vote against comprehensive reform. Although nobody really seems to think that it's going to come to the floor. Like they sort of sidelined a climate bill that was against all odds, maybe was going to make its way to a vote for this immigration bill that seems less likely to come to a vote. And my impression is because they saw a more political advantage in it.
Well, and they've also been. I mean, remember the Luis Gutierrez, congressman in Illinois, his little snit halfway through health care reform that he said he was going to back away unless they promised to bring up immigration?
Right.
I mean, this is something, maybe not a powerful in relationship to its size in the Democratic coalition, but a fairly powerful part of the Democratic coalition has wanted and has seen, even getting less attention than Don't Ask, Don't Tell from time to time. Just because.
Oh, absolutely. But it does seem like there's been kind of a strategic shift from the first 15 months of the administration doing everything they could to slow walk this issue and keep it on the sidelines to suddenly Harry Reid just deciding to jam it front and center.
Well, Harry Reid doing that and the White House taking a position on Arizona, which he doesn't need to do. And it really doesn't. I mean...
Well, I don't know.
Like, the president coming out and saying he's opposed to it.
He doesn't need to, but it's a lot easier than passing immigration legislation. It's a much easier way to signal to Hispanic voters that the Democratic Party is their party, which some of them I think had been beginning to doubt. Mm-hmm. It's a lot easier to go out and scold the governor of Arizona from the Rose Garden than it is to invest a huge amount of capital in immigration reform legislation. I think we'll still see whether that's something they plan to do.
Mm. Well.
But it does. I mean, this does seem likely to remind or unless Republicans can find a way, which some of them, like Ana Navarro down in a Marco Rubio ally, and maybe Rubio too down in Florida, are trying to do. There's an argument to be made. Look, Democrats dropped the ball on this. They said they were going to act on it. They didn't. There's been some attempt by Republicans to make that case, but I think this sets that back. To say that they're really the party of immigration reform, I don't know. I mean, I think it's a very unpredictable moment.
How do you read Lindsey Graham on this? I mean, the most venal political reading would be that his friend John McCain has a primary coming up shortly, and you can't afford to have this be the issue for a month.
Right. I mean, he's a tough guy to read. I mean, if he had been operating on sort of venal local politics all down the road, he would not have been taking all these stands that make him really unpopular in South Carolina. So I think it's a little unfair to immediately assume that he's playing politics when he's actually done himself an enormous amount of political harm with some of the issues he's championed. He's really one of the maybe 2 or 3, 4 or 5 Republicans in the Senate who seem to be in good faith working with Democrats in some of this legislation. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it is an interesting moment for these guys. And you were talking about Bennett out in Utah.
I was. I've been writing about that for a couple of weeks. It feels like it finally started to get national attention yesterday.
You are national attention. You write for the Washington Post, man.
Well, I mean, it was one of those things where
Don't pretend you're some marginal blogger anymore.
But it was one of those things where I wrote about it a week ago, and I think a couple people linked to it, and then the Salt Lake Tribune had something else on it, and that got it really burning up. But that's not important. I mean, the important thing is the background
so
is that
what's going on out there? It's like sort of a revolt of the party hacks,
yeah.
even, right? Like these people generally considered zombies who vote at local and state party conventions.
Well, no, it's interesting what happened there. So, background, Bob Bennett, his father was a senator. He was elected in 1992. He was seen as very safe because he's a Republican in Utah, and there's not many things he breaks away from. The two things, really, that drive Republicans to complain about him are, one, his co-sponsorship of a health care bill with Ron Wyden, which isn't very relevant, and two, his vote for TARP, which wasn't actually that important in the end. It was something that Mitch McConnell also voted for.
Yeah, it wasn't unusual. Right?
So with those two things, he became an incredibly unpopular figure in the hardcore base in Utah. Now, not so much immigration. In the past, it was immigration that eventually sunk Chris Cannon, who was a congressman who lost in 2008 in the primary. But so two things were happening. Bennett was being just a little bit heterodox, like 10% heterodox. And at the same time, Tea Party activists were filling up these slots to go to the convention. There's 3,500 slots to go, delegates for this Utah Republican convention on May 8th. And just over the course of the year, those people were becoming delegates. So, and
this is the kind of thing that has been talked about in a lot of places, but really hasn't been done elsewhere, right? By these sort of grassroots conservatives.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's some Republican parties that are more that have been more active. I mean, Utah's got a really strong Republican Party, wins everything. It just didn't have really new blood in it for a while. And here come all these people showing up at meetings and outvoting other members. And what they did with the convention is really local Republican parties can choose who their delegates are. And if somebody was a Bennett supporter, they made sure they wouldn't be one of the convention delegates. So there's this perfect storm in Utah where the most hardcore economic conservative, if not other issues, people took over the party, and now they're threatening to vote Bennett out of there. I mean, I even talked to Congressman Rob Bishop today, who's one of the two Republican congressmen from the state, and he was saying, the poll in the Salt Lake Tribune, which started this latest round of discussion about it, that shows Bennett coming in third. He's like, well, that might be true. He's definitely in second, though. I mean, he's definitely on track to.
This is a poll of delegates now.
A poll of delegates. It was.
And if he loses at the convention, he can't really. Is there a way for him to get back on that ballot?
No. You can either, if somebody wins 60% of the vote at a convention, then they are the nominee. If somebody wins 59%, then they are in a runoff with somebody who gets. Who got 41?
But a runoff inside the convention.
No, runoff like a primary on the primary ballot. You go
to
go to the voters, and that's the only chance Bennett really has to win.
And even then, that's a tough.
That's tough.
Right?
I mean, this in 2008, Chris Cannon, the congressman, lost the convention, but forced a runoff, and then lost the runoff.
And is there a unified, sort of united Tea Party favorite, conservative favorite?
Yeah, this guy, Mike Lee, who is just a constitutional attorney. He was a Supreme Court clerk, and kind of came out of nowhere on the national scene. But he convinced, the first warning shot for Bennett was that the Attorney General of the state, Shurtleff, was I think, or actually no, he didn't threaten. He actually got in the race for a while, but then he backed off for Lee. Just Lee organized the right people at the right time really quickly. There's two other candidates who who have been going for the same voters, but Lee's the one who's got the conservative establishment and the Tea Party's happy, and Lee's the one endorsed.
And is Lee the mastermind of the strategy in the first place, or was it not a strategy?
And it just rolled. It really did come from the bottom up. I mean, he's eventually got the support of FreedomWorks. I mean, FreedomWorks is actually sending out mail on his behalf, and they're organizing a Tea Party at the convention to help organize his support. But it really just started with these conservative activists wanting to beat someone, to punish somebody over TARP.
Mm-hmm. And conservative activists around the country or in Utah?
Everywhere, but Utah's the one where it's easiest to do so. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you had a convention, for in Arizona, J.D. Hayworth would obviously just destroy John McCain next month. If you had a convention, just in all these cases, the only thing saving a lot of Republican incumbents is the fact that you're going to go to a general with name recognition and the other factors can help you survive.
I mean, this strikes me actually as we had a kind of, I think we basically agree on 90% of this, but we did, Jonathan Martin and I did a story on basically complaining that the Tea Party movement had been wildly overhyped by the media, and both in its import and in its sort of exotic features. We cited, among other evidence, the Washington Post's hiring of a blogger who's an expert on them, although,
yes,
which is not to say that, we aren't both fans. But, and I think, you tell me, correct me, or argue with me when I'm wrong here, but it seems to me that the Utah situation is actually, kind of a great example for both of us, which is to say, it's as you say, it's a way in which a very small number of activists were able to exert real influence inside the party, and this is, and maybe make a senator, which is a huge deal. But it seems to me, to some degree, it's the exception that proves the rule, because they're able to triumph in this within this very kind of closed system in a way they probably couldn't even in a Republican primary, in which they haven't been able to. The Mike Lees of the world are getting single-digit votes when they run in Republican primaries.
Well, Mike Lee has, but I think Rand Paul will probably win in Kentucky.
Rand Paul seems like another exception, right? He's using his father's list. His father's a giant national celebrity in a particular world. He is somebody who's been politically active in the state for a while. I'm thinking more of there's a guy whose name I'm blanking on who ran against Mark Kirk in Illinois and got 5 or 6% of the vote. But in a number of lower-profile primaries, I was thinking Andreevsky. Is that his name?
Oh no, he ran against. He ran the governor's race. He was the one with the endorsement from Lech Walesa, which inspired one of my favorite. Conservative blogs like to write about, and I like conservative blogs. I read them all day, but like to write about how there is no racism in the conservative movement, and then also how the media is biased for not covering something. And, this was one of those, why isn't the media covering Lech Walesa's historic endorsement of this guy that no one's ever heard of, who's going to get 10% of the vote?
I covered the hell out of it. But, yes, I thought it was amazing.
Oh, we can put a link up to that on the blog page later. Yeah.
Please note. So, I guess I think, there are candidates for whom Tea Party, I sort of haven't to use that phrase. I think a lot of the people involved in various grassroots conservative movements wouldn't use that word to describe themselves always, but in which, this sort of new grassroots conservative energy is a part of what's fueling them. But outside Utah, it's hard for me to think of somebody who's getting elected to something. Or any bit, so.
It's happening at a lower level. I've been told, I can't name off the bat right now, but local city council races in a couple of places where first-time Tea Party candidates have won, and it doesn't matter. I agreed with parts of that story, and in our response, I think I agreed with I agree with a lot of it, and even pointed out something that went unmentioned that actually was mentioned in your story. I just meant that it wasn't mentioned enough. The rest of the media. Yeah. But let me see if I can break it down. The first part is that once Tea Parties became sensationally covered, there was no real screening used by the media to figure out what was happening within them. All of a sudden they're a big deal, so that somebody would call a Tea Party leader, look at a website with a Tea Party page and call the first phone number, and the person would have a statement, and all of a sudden their statement was on equal footing with a member of Congress.
This is why I was constantly instant messaging you and saying, "Hey, who should I call?
Who is actually relevant?
This particular group? Is this a real person?"
Yeah. Well, the Post before I got here, got not a lot of trouble. I think Mother Jones criticized the Post for quoting this guy Dale Robertson, who claimed to be original Tea Party founder. And if you Google quickly, you see this guy, but he's actually totally unpopular within the movement.
And there's the guy who started the TEA party in Florida.
No, this is a different.
A different guy, but who in fact didn't. When I called him up about he said he didn't really like the Tea Party, he didn't really believe in protests, but he thought it was a useful ballot line. Yeah. So there are lots of people kind of glomming on.
Well, there's that. There's a guy in Nevada, but this was a guy who was kicked out of a local event he was at because he had this sign that said "taxpayer equals NIGGAR."
Right, which is now famous.
Yeah, and people were angry at the Post for not double checking, and I think there's that, and there's also the candidates will say they're either a Tea Party candidate or the next Scott Brown. Those are the two big things. I think finally the next Scott Brown thing died down after 18 of those guys lost primaries.
Right, and Marco Rubio, the former, I mean, this is the classic case,
Yeah,
right?
this is
Former Speaker of the Florida Assembly, Jeb Bush protege, who, among other things, is the vehicle for this sort of long-time feud among the sort of highest level of Florida Republican insiders, would much rather be described as and see himself as a man of the grassroots and of the Tea Parties than, you know, Jeb Bush's way to get back at Charlie Crist or whatever. Not that both aren't true, right? But but there's always the bias to. And these guys, there are a lot of people with various incentives, as you wrote about,
there are,
including in the media, to sort of to hype the movement.
But it really is if you compare him to Ned Lamont, Ned Lamont was more of a pure figure who just got in because he hated Joe Lieberman's votes on the war,
right.
And Rubio managed to make a Lamont-Lieberman situation out of Charlie Crist supporting the stimulus.
Out of a much more traditional political grudge match.
It was, but you were starting to get the other thing, which I think you guys, like I said, you guys mentioned, but it's not mentioned enough, is that I was thinking about this today. There was a progressive group, a Progressive Change Campaign Committee, that emailed me to see if I could show up at some event they were doing. And I didn't show up because I was doing this, but I'll probably blog about it, where they were getting a bunch of Democrats to call for an investigation of Goldman Sachs. And, this is one of the things that it reminds me that move by a progressive group, which will probably get 60 members of the majority party on something, gets far less attention, and even the progressive media, than something Steve King says. And Steve King doesn't have any power whatsoever right now. He's member of Congress. But that's
there's both a deliberate. I think there are two things. I think there's genuinely a deliberate strategy by the DNC and Democrats to try to portray Republicans as extremist freaks. Which, why not, right? I mean, that's always a strategy by both sides. Also, as you noted, it drives traffic, right? I mean, I think there's a lot, you get print the most outrageous thing you can find somebody on the other side saying on your conservative or your liberal side or your mainstream side, and that's going to get more clicks than so I think that's certainly part of it. There's a sort of media environment that favors that.
And it's really left these liberals who should be, I don't know, there should be a good moment for them out in the cold because there's only so much coverage you can do in a day, and HuffPo and TPM and the rest of these sites would rather spend it on coverage of wacky conservatives than of what the left is up to, what the White House is up to.
And they're blaming their readers, right?
Yeah, it gets more readers. And if you read the comment threads, they all get 100. I mean, sometimes a thing on the post will get 10,000 comments, and it's really every comment is this is the first time they've heard of a conservative going off the wall on something.
So I can't believe this. Blame Arianna Huffington for the Tea Party. There's a certain irony in that.
Well, actually, I was talking to somebody from a Republican group today who was laughing about, literally Dr. Evil laughing about how one of their web ads got on the Huffington Post page and it drew 100,000 readers or whatever to their website. It's not like the liberal media nails these guys. Once in a while they do. I mean, I think. In the end, if J.D. Hayworth loses John McCain, maybe it will have something to do with the fact that people beat the heck out of him on his conspiracy stuff on his radio show. But by and large, it just ends up amplifying what Republicans are saying.
Right, and in the place of the liberal media inside a Republican primary is ultimately pretty limited.
That's true, but I see it. I see that's why what Tea Parties are doing, and I feel like. When you wrote that story, we had already kind of peaked because once Democrats actually passed health care, this idea that politics was relying on this third outside force of activists.
Right, it showed the limits of their power. And also they were showing, ultimately, there were hundreds, if not a couple thousand people at some of these protests. Actually, I've been writing about SEIU a bit lately, and they were always, the big union guys were always sort of marveling at the amount of cover because they can turn out thousands of people without too much work and regularly do it. And they were always just infuriated by and perplexed by how these Tea Parties could turn out a couple hundred people and get a newspaper article when SEIU could march a bunch of nurses down Pennsylvania Avenue and nobody would notice.
Right. And the argument was that the Tea Party argument is that, well, these are all first-time activists coming out of the woodwork and they're not paid for union thugs. But that kind of argument loses some of its momentum after a year of the same people coming out to Tea Party protests. I mean, even in Utah,
and also there's just as we were we certainly are susceptible to this. There's just a bias in the media to the new, and this was the new thing, and so thus got a lot more coverage, but I guess it's not as new as it was.
It wasn't. I mean, it is worth covering, but I don't know. I disagree with the idea that no one really is suggesting that you should cover Tea Parties less. I mean, I actually agree with the thesis of the article that there was sensationalism going on and a glut of Tea Party coverage. But it really did feel like once Democrats... I mean, right now, I think this is going to go up after Democrats force another financial regulation vote. But the Democrats right now in the Senate are doing what the base has been asking them to do for basically a year, which is if Republicans are going to put their backs up against the wall and everything, just make them vote and vote and vote and vote and then break a filibuster. And, things like that where it showed the Democratic Party is actually able to govern, I think, end up becoming more interesting than what people outside are yelling about. But it's worth it.
Yeah, I think that is true, although it's I think there are also limits politically to the extent to which even if you are doing the kind of confrontational stuff that the base wants, it's still so much easier for the opposition party to rally the base to save America from the socialists than it is for the party in power to, have people quite pleased that they're doing what they want them to do, but they're not about to go out in the streets or maybe even necessarily vote.
But I'm interested in what you were just saying about the Democrats. I mean, how would you characterize the degree to which they hype Tea Party crazy Republican stories? And I mean, has it gone down recently, or is it still a lot of what they send you?
No, I think the volume of the story, maybe have gone down a little bit. We mocked them a bit for the. I mean, I think the DNC got a little bit of blowback for the just constant deluge of whatever the craziest thing some activist you never heard of had said that day, and certainly their stated their stated new strategy is to run a contrast on the issues with the Republicans and talk more about what's happening inside the Capitol and run on accomplishments. Their stated strategy has never been we're going to make the Republicans look like a bunch of freaks. So I don't know.
Well, their stated strategy hasn't, but when I was at the Independent, I was allowed to do whatever I wanted. That's one reason I like that place, and I still link to it all the time, and I defend that place. Kind of model of journalism is I was never told, hey, George Soros has an idea, run with it. But definitely, right. I was aware of what liberal media, Media Matters and things like that wanted the message to be. And I remember in February of that year, before Rush Limbaugh was at CPAC, when he said he wanted Obama to fail, definitely there was a word going around that liberal organizations should be accosting every Republican and asking them if they agreed with Rush Limbaugh. And then at CPAC, Think Progress was running around asking Republicans if they agreed with Rush Limbaugh. And there was this empowering of that voice because Democrats thought that it would be bad for Republicans if they were associated with that. And I don't think they're 100% wrong.
Right?
It's just definitely that was the stated, not the stated, that was the sub rosa strategy of Democrats and liberals, was to refuse Republicans to craft their own identity and make them be fringe. And what happened is just the fringe took over anyway, so it didn't matter.
Right. In fact, maybe it helped empower folks who a direction where of sort of pure full-on opposition, which was where the party wound up.
Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, I think it's still part of the strategy. I think it's just gotten a little boring, so it's less effective.
Yeah.
But I also think you're right that they've moved away from it to some degree.
Well, if they actually...
Which is probably bad for both of our traffic, if people are bored of this. I don't know.
I mean, I still cover parts of it. The rule I try to set up... Well, now I know that anything on the fringe will get picked up by somebody at some point, so if I have a take on it, I'll use it. I try to limit it to things that affect policy in some way. I'll write about the Arizona birther bill because it might actually pass.
It matters. I know. I sort of missed your coverage of the really flaky, irrelevant parts of the fringe that are really fascinating, like Larry Sinclair, the guy who claimed to have slept with Barack Obama.
Oh yeah, stuff like that. I mean
there was sort of a part. I'm still waiting for the book from you on all the crazy people you met out there, on the real fringe. The people who make the Arizona bill look well within the mainstream of American politics.
Oh yeah, it's just because of the leveling effect of the internet. Somebody like that is more relevant than they would have been, 10, 12, 20 years ago, because they can get a video into as many hands as, any media's video. And certainly the Sinclair video, which you wrote about, boy, this is really going back. I mean, it's in your archives. It's my archives. But, you know, that video got 1 million views before it was pulled.
I bet it's up to... Oh, it was pulled, finally.
It was pulled, and he started a new account, and obviously a lot of people copied it. That video got 1 million views, and I think it's really only the Globe is the only tabloid. The Globe will run a story about him every month. And, you know, it's a real judgment call you make, whether or not it's worth it for you to follow and explain this part of the Fringe, because you know it's getting to, you know, maybe not a million people.
At what point can you say we're shining? You know, sunlight's the best disinfectant. Like, it's worth writing a story. I wound up writing a story about him, this guy based on basically his criminal record of forgery was his specialty. But yeah, no, I mean that's the thing we wrestle with all the time.
No,
here and elsewhere.
Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, especially you probably encountered this on the blog. You know, you'll hustle for some actual new information, or a quote, or a piece of data, and it gets less attention than some sort of, you know, oppo that just got passed, or some sort of person spouting off really crazy. I mean, like,
there is no justice.
Well, I didn't work very hard for this video last year of Mike Castle. You know, it was really that's what started the birther spasm of 2009. It was
right.
Congressman
Mike Castle, woman yelling at Mike Castle,
getting yelled at.
I remember that.
I happened, you know, I just because it was on my radar, I checked for it and found it, but I didn't like go to Delaware and spelunk that. But then that got, you know, more traffic, and then stories where I dug through, you know, 990s and FEC reports. But whatever, I mean, like
absolutely.
I think it's just maybe the interests of journalists are different than the interest of party machinery. But I really think that the fact that partisan media want to cover all this, and the fact that at least one of the parties wanted people to cover this for a long time has had a real impact on how we talk about and how much we write about Tea Parties.
I think that's right. I think the partisan media drives the mainstream media. It empowers the partisans a little more.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Now we'll say. Anyway, we will no doubt be driven. Now that we're both, you're on the editorial page of the Post? Right?
No, I'm in the we just launched Post Politics.
Oh, but you're on the
politics page. I work in the news section, and I work in the politics section, and
So we'll both resist being driven by partisan media.
Well, I mean, what I like to do is just admit when it's coming from some partisan media, which is, you know, I'll say
and
Democrats are passing this around.
Sophisticated about it,
I mean,
which is nice.
An interesting thing I had, and I feel like we need to wrap up, but an interesting thing I had last week was I posted something about the Luntz memo on, you know, Frank Luntz wrote a memo saying Republicans should define financial reform as a permanent bailout. And I noticed Mitch McConnell using the phrase and said, like, well, this is really kicking around. And I got a call pretty quickly from a Republican saying, you know, how dare you say that? So I was like, oh, this is interesting. And I just wrote another post pointing out that Republicans don't like it when you talk about this. So, I mean, that's one thing I try to do is if partisans are pushing for or against something, you know, I'll point out that they are. And I actually feel like that's...
And readers are getting increasingly, I think, sophisticated about the direction of spin of any given piece of information. Sometimes too sophisticated, you know, and always assume that something is kind of spun up.
Oh, yeah.
And always look to the political advantage. But
I hope
anyway,
that. I mean,
nice talking to you, Dave.
Yeah, it was really good talking to you, man. And congratulations for the job that you've had for 3 years. You're good at it. Just
for surviving it. I will go win the mid-afternoon now.
Win tea time.
Yeah. Exactly. That's sort of my special. I never win the morning. Tea time is that's
you have kids. You have a life. No.
Yes, they win the
if
kids.
You can win nap
morning.
time, then I think you've had a good day.
Exactly. Getting the kid to the school bus is winning the morning for me.
Thank you.
I let Mike Allen win the morning.